Hello, welcome to part 5. We're going to get a little bit more interesting with our modelling. And the way I'm doing this is, I don't want to go through every single little detail before we start working on something. I think it's easier to learn how to do it at the points when you need that information. Because that was the way everybody learns, or I learned anyway. I get to a point and go, well, I've no idea what I'm doing next. Google. So I found that's the easiest way to learn, so that's the way I think is good to go from this point on, because now you know how to select faces, vertices, and move them, manipulate them, rotate them, scale them. You understand the window enough to get cracking with it, and you understand the viewport window enough. So now I think we'll do something together. We finished with the table. Doesn't matter that if you got it or deleted it. It's not important, because we're going to do something different. I think it might be fun to do a little house, and then we can use a couple of modifiers which we haven't discussed yet, and maybe give it a little bit of a texture. We'll have a little delve into that. But for now, first we want a cube, and bearing in mind that's 2 meters square, so it's not sitting directly on the floor, because it's, well, this is perspective and isometric. In isometric view, you can clearly see that this is falling underneath this level, this x-axis, which is the ground. So, along with the other ways I've told you, you can move things with GZ or GZ and then hold Control or hold Shift. You can also just give it a value. So if this scale is 1, if I move it up 1, GZ, I just press 1, GZ, 1, and it moves up 1. Being one of, one scale. So now we know that that's sitting on the floor. I'm going to click out of isometric view. We're sitting on the floor. That cube is sitting on the floor, and we know that's a bit taller than a person. So if we wanted a house, I would want to scale this up. And there are various more advanced ways of setting where you scale from. But just for the purpose of being a beginner and just getting cracking on with it, it's best if I just do the simplest way. So if I want, this cube is 2 meters squared, a house is probably what, 2, 4, 6, maybe 10, a big house. So if I press S10, that is now 10 times bigger. So this is now 20 meters in size. 20 meters, that's a bit big, isn't it, for a house? I'm just going to click drag and put that maybe down to 14, 13 meters. Maybe that's a house. That's about house size. And I'm just going to click back into isometric and just bring this up. I mean, 1 is not going to do it now. So I'm just going to eyeball it. All right. So there is the cube out of isometric. That is the cube that's going to be the start of our house. And there's going to be many ways to do this. Excuse me, I'm drinking tea. So if we wanted to add shape to this house, let's say we're doing a kind of medieval layered type of house, there's a few ways we could do that. Each is perfectly acceptable, but one of them comes with separate issues. So let's say I wanted this house to have like a medieval or, I don't know, 1600s house in England. So it had the levels at the top tended to be further out, and as it goes down, until you get to the lower level where it's just flat with the building. So as it, as I say, it comes up, you get a level here, you get a level here, you get a level here. One way of doing that is to duplicate. I'm sure I said duplicate. To duplicate the cube, if you press Shift D, and then on the Z axis, I'm going to move it up. Just to see it. The increments are not important. So I've now copied this cube, and what's very important, and I mean very important to be aware about copying and duplicating things in Blender, by using Shift D to copy this cube, I've made a brand new cube. This is its own cube. Changes I make on here are not going to affect anything on here because it's a duplicate. It's just copied it, which means each one of these cubes is using its individual memory allocation. So if I kept Shift-D'ing this cube, the more and more cubes I add, every single one of them will be individually using memory. The other way to do it, which I do as regularly as I can, if I can see an opportunity to do this, I will do this, is to, instead of pressing Shift-D to duplicate, you press Alt-D. I'm just going to move it on the X. And then you've got a clone of this, which uses the same memory allocation as its original, this one. So you'll see what changes I make to this cube, just pressing tab, it's changing the other cube, but it's not changing the one above, because the one above is a duplicate, but the one to the left is a clone. So whatever changes I make to this cube will be represented in that same cube. So this is especially useful for things like trees. If you have a tree, drinking tea, if you have a tree and you want lots of them, you wouldn't, to avoid eating all of your memory, rather than taking one tree and then Shift-D and duplicating it, then rotating it, Shift-D, duplicating it, rotating it, every single one of those will be using memory. If you Alt-D, it only uses memory for one of those clones. Everything else that you put out there, as long as you Alt-D, it's only using that memory for that one thing. Of course, you're adding a bit with the calculations for light, but da-de-da. So we've Shift-D'd this, it's a brand new, its own individual copy. So I'm going to make this smaller on the Z, so SZ. And I am going to tab into edit mode. I'm going to grab this front face. I'm just going to press G, Y, because I just want to extend it on the Y axis. So this will be the top section. As I say, what I'm doing now is one way to do this. It's not the way I would do it, but it is a way to do it, and it's perfectly reasonable for images and the like. But I'll explain the problems, the troubles you might have doing it this way, but it's a good place to start. So if I now bring this GZ and bring it down, what we have to the left here, what's going on here, is where two faces, this face and this face, are now overlapping. They are using exactly the same, they're in the same spot on the x-axis. So if you look up here, x0, this one, oh sorry, if we go to the face, x is 1, over here, x is also 1. So it shouldn't be occupying the same place, because that doesn't happen in life. So what I would do in this situation to avoid this, because it will cause havoc with rendering, as you see it causes havoc in the viewport, is I'm just going to bring in both of these faces, because it's going to be the same on the other side. Or no, actually I'm going to extend, I'm going to bring them out further. And the quick way to do that is if you select 2 or more faces, when you scale, it will use a median point, which is here, right in the middle. So when I scale it, I'm going to scale it on the x-axis, because I want them to come to spread apart on the x-axis. So if I press SX, I can do that. And that will do, what that will do is to negate this problem. And I only need to do it a little bit. So if I press SX, and I'm going to hold Shift, and just so that disappears. And now that's not a problem and barely noticeable. That might be a bit too far back, so I'm actually just going to select that face and just take it back a bit with GY on the y-axis. Okay, so that's fine. Now to get the second level, I can simply Shift-D and then press Z, so I'm duplicating it on the Z-axis. I'm going to bring it up so it meets. And then again, I'm going to select this front face. I'm on face selection, and I'm just going to GY, bring that back. And with this, because we've got more things occupying the same space, even if only it's a little bit here, it's best to avoid it altogether. So I'm just going to select that face and that face again, and I'm going to scale it out from the median point, just so that is no longer a problem. SX, Shift. Okay, so that was all it needed. And then finally, I can go Shift-D, Z, and then same thing again. I've realised, actually no, we need to do it properly. So just because I've messed that up, and clearly if I take that in, it's going to end up with this. So I'm just going to select both of these. So you can select multiple objects and tab into edit mode. So now I can select all the faces I need, because these are already set up together. And again, if I press SX, I'm scaling out. I might have to do it at the front. Oh, I haven't moved this one. Okay, so now it's not a problem. So I'm just going to edit mode with this, and I'm just going to bring that level back. So we've got our layered facade, the front of the house. But we're not going to carry on from this point, because I just want to quickly explain why this would be, other than those little issues there. There's also issues with texturing, because let's say you've got a brick pattern. In fact, you can visualize it. I don't need to go into it yet. So if you've got a brick pattern here, clearly that brick pattern is not going to continue. It is continuing. If that wasn't here, the brick pattern would be fine. But because it's interrupted by this new bit of geometry here, and this one has its own brick pattern, they're clearly not going to match. They're two different textures. They're the same texture, but they're texturing in different ways on two different objects. So you then have to mess around with what's called the UVs. We're going to get into all of that in a minute, actually, or the next 12. Oh, it's been a long one. Actually, okay, right. So that's one way of, I'm going to stop up here, and then the next one we'll do the other way. But this is just a way to quickly edit some shapes to get you the very bare bones of a medieval style house, which is what we'll intend to make. That's one way to do it. Next time I'm going to show you the way I would do it. All right, I'm going to catch y'all then. Farewell.